Hello, everyone. It's Bactrian, and today we're going to be talking about Mark Carney in the 2025 Canadian federal election, the currently ongoing election. And we're going to be talking about what I'm coining the Mark Carney bubble, the Carney bubble. We had, up until very recently, we had the Poilievre bubble that perhaps has burst a little bit, or perhaps totally. We'll see how it pans out. But and now we're in the new epoch, the new era, the Carney bubble time, right? Where Mark Carney's numbers have shot up like a rocket extremely quickly, and he's soaring to newer and newer heights. I mean, depending on who you believe. I mean, the rolling Main Street and Liaison Strategies polls. I mean, they have him at a lead of about 5-6 points on average between all of these polls, something about that. More like 5 points, which is pretty solid lead. I mean, Angus Reid in their poll on the first day of the election period, they put the Liberals ahead 8 points, 8 points. And then of course the most optimistic one, Ecos. Now, whether or not you take Ecos too seriously, it's a point of contention. I will say that people were laughing Ecos out of the room when they had a poll that had the Liberals ahead in February with 1.4 points. But they did turn out to be right. Now, obviously, these numbers are kind of insane. They have the Liberals ahead 15 points. We'll see, right, whether or not things get that bad for the Tories. I mean, I suppose I could maybe see it. I find it kind of hard to believe that it could get this lopsided. It would be pretty unprecedented in recent Canadian elections. I mean, the last time someone won a majority of the popular vote even was the 80s, and Mulroney did in 1988, I believe, or came close. This would be a truly insane result. I don't necessarily think that'll be the case. But regardless of whether you believe the most optimistic or the most pessimistic, most bullish or bearish numbers for the Liberals, very clearly they are in the lead. And very clearly they have rapidly accelerated into the lead in a kind of, really breathtakingly short amount of time. So what do I mean when I say bubble? Why am I framing this as a bubble? Well, the thing is about this current lead is that very clearly, we talked about this in another video I did today, a lot of this is due to two factors, one of which is the Trump trade and the tariffs situation, right? The tariff threats, Trump's 51st state comments, all of that stuff, right? And Canadians, they're naturally pretty shocked reaction to it, right? I mean, the guy said he wants to make us the 51st state. Come on. Right? So the Liberals are getting a lot of points for this because they're seen as owning this kind of issue, and Carney is seen as owning this issue. That obviously, even if the threats remain as they are, it's not going to be the number one issue forever. There's going to be a political consensus reached around it, and it will eventually fade as the largest issue is sort of one of the larger points here. And so that's the first thing, is that why I would suggest that this is a bubble, right? Is that it is kind of largely grounded around this whole the trade stuff. And it's not going to remain the number one issue forever. The other reason I would suggest that this is sort of looking like a kind of bubble for Carney is that a lot of it is also from NDP support absolutely flocking to Carney. And, a lot of these people are not liberals. They're not dedicated liberals. They aren't necessarily the same ideologically as liberals. And so he kind of is in the situation where, due to these momentary issues, he's been able to assemble this massive coalition with all of these disparate forces, all united behind this sort of, Canadian like nationalist agenda, right? And so as a result, it's kind of a bubble, right? I mean, it's kind of a bubble. Uh, it's a support that is unnaturally high due to these sort of secular conditions in the short term, or not secular. These the opposite of secular, using the market analogies. These conditions that are sort of unique to this moment and unique to this time. Um, so what do we have for potential like analogies to this, right? What do we have for like periods where perhaps a party had unnaturally high support, and we'll get to some other reasons perhaps that it's unnaturally high in a moment, but and that support went one way or the other. Well, I mean, an obvious example is uh, the Liberals in 2015, in the immediate aftermath of 2015. So Trudeau, he soars ahead in the polls because, I mean, in large part because the NDP under Mulcair ran a truly terrible campaign, just a god awful campaign. It is amazing that Mulcair is a regular contributor on CTV giving electoral advice, because the guy ran a god awful campaign in 2015. Really fumbled. I mean, seemingly what's going to have been the NDP's only shot at getting into government, probably ever. But that's a whole other matter. And you know, you can see that they rocketed up extremely quickly. And then after the election, the Liberals actually went up further in the polls. I mean, in Trudeau's honeymoon period, the guy was at, you know, like had a majority of the vote in a lot of polls. He was absolutely soaring. You know, and then the numbers started to come back down to earth. And generally, as the controversies and, you know, you had some of the original Trudeau scandals, like the SNC Lavalin thing, all of that stuff, like that, you know, it started to weigh down. So that's one example. I mean, and obviously Trudeau would go on to win the 2019 election and the 2021 election, but he didn't get majorities either time. It clearly, the sort of the support was down to a much more kind of natural floor of kind of core Liberal supporters, and you know, that was that, right? Um, then now, what I would suggest is that there are reasons to believe that this outcome could happen, right? That this is the probable outcome. Now, I obviously we can't predict into the future for future election cycles. Who knows where things will be in, you know, 2029 or whatever, right? But what we can see right now is that the main thing driving Carney's level of support right now, and the issues he's seen as owning the most, are, yeah, Trump's threats of it. This is from Angus Reid. This is the Angus Reid poll that had the Liberals ahead 8 points. So which of the two leaders do you think are the best to handle the following issues? This is the net result shown, right? So for Trump's threats of annexation of Canada becoming a 51st state, Carney was seen as plus 25. Like, he's seen as 25 points better to handle this by voters than Poilievre. Trade wars, Carney plus 28. Developing or expanding trade relationships outside the U.S., Carney plus 28. And then, you know, other issues, improving healthcare, plus 21. Protecting Canada's economy, I mean, this is kind of related to these three, so plus 22. Relations between Ottawa and the provinces, that's more of a normal issue, plus 22. But reducing the cost of living, Carney's only plus 9, right? There is sort of his best issues are these trade war issues, and they and even in this moment where he's ahead a lot, he's still seen as kind of weaker on cost of living stuff. And so if you have a situation where the kind of concerns about the Trump trade stuff dissipate, and who's to say when that will happen? We don't know when it'll happen. Obviously, what might matter the most in the short term is if those concerns dissipate or start to diminish before the election. And I don't know. We don't know how it's going to happen. It's a very fluid situation. I would suggest that it's unlikely to diminish, given, you know, Trump has not really backed off much on the tariff stuff at all. He keeps, you know, kicking the ball down the field, and you know, it's not exactly clear what the game plan here is. So I'm not too sure that that will kind of pop. This bubble will pop before the election. I think that's actually rather unlikely. Um, but it will at some point. Even if, I mean, Trump's going to be president, presumably, barring him, I don't know, something unexpected happening. I mean, the guy is pretty old, so I guess who knows. Uh, but he should be, in theory, president for the next 4 years, and then who knows what's going to happen after that, right? But the trade stuff will presumably continue to be an issue for that whole time, perhaps, but definitely not to the same intensity. So what you're going to see at a certain point is a kind of, you know, that issue just kind of losing salience. So even if he holds absolute dominance of it, as the concerns of the electorate transition to other issues, I think you could very easily see a scenario where the Liberals, their level of support starts to kind of crawl back down into the 30s. And you could see that within a couple months, right? I mean, this really is a kind of perfectly timed thing where their support kind of skyrockets in time for the election. And of course, then we'll see how it holds over the election period. But that is the sort of thing that I could totally see happening. I could see them winning the election with about these margins, or maybe even higher, maybe a little lower. And then just a few months after, kind of analogous to Trudeau in 2015, they come back down to earth, and then they got to fight it out, and would have all of the years of incumbency behind them as potentially a negative, potentially a positive, depending on how they spin it. And you would kind of have had the bubble burst at that point. Um, and but the thing is, what I would also say is that there's another example of a kind of clearly a bubble candidacy that I think paints a more grim picture, right? That I think is a little more concerning, should be a little more concerning to the Liberals and to Canadian Liberals and stuff, right? And that's scenario, and this is a leader who Carney has actually had kind of some personal tie, like they're clearly like in the kind of the same boat on a lot of stuff. I mean, Carney, hold on, I'll find the. I'm talking about Starmer. I'm talking about Starmer in the UK. I'll stop postponing the reveal. But if we well, let me find his stuff with Starmer. Yeah, I mean he's met with Starmer recently. Something else. Oh my, how embarrassing that I don't have it on hand. But it doesn't matter. There was he's kind of in the same camp as Starmer, as a sort of like a center left, quote unquote, or like centrist leader in a G7 country, and he of course has more of a personal connection to the UK. He kind of is running on a sort of similar platform to Starmer's, which is that this sort of we're gonna turn away from this sort of right wing populist stuff a bit, and but we're gonna address people's concerns. We're gonna moderate on economic issues. I mean, in Starmer's case, this was the turn from Corbyn to Starmer's current policies, which is sort of red Toryism, or sorry, a blue laborism over there. But obviously, in Carney's case, like I don't think Trudeau is not really ideologically analogous to Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, I would suggest if someone believes that, then I think you have some serious misconceptions about what these people believe. But Corbyn is clearly much to the left of someone like Trudeau. But even so, I mean, Carney, his whole main thing has been kind of shifting to the center, stuff with the rolling back on the carbon tax, a lot of his promises about this like middle class tax cut thing. This is a pretty, it's a more of like a market liberal campaign as opposed to a social liberal campaign, so to speak, right? And of course, there are elements of progressive policy. I mean, stuff like the promises to expand the dental care or stuff like that, right? But it's not it's a kind of there. It's a similar situation, right? In some ways, in terms of that. I mean, obviously, the reasons for Starmer's bubble were very different, but I mean, he was facing off against an unpopular conservative incumbent government, all of this stuff, right? What I mean to say is that Starmer, he comes in and like as you can see in the lead up to the 2024 election, he's ahead by like 15 points, right? Absolutely leading. He has actually a really bad election campaign, right? So, I mean, people talk about the Tories in the 2024 UK election. They did pretty poorly. A whole variety of reasons why Sunak did poorly. Reform split the vote. The D-Day. He had a really famous incident where he left the 80th anniversary of D-Day to go do an interview. Completely bizarre fumble, just hilariously stupid. Um, but you had all this stuff happen. But meanwhile, like Labor, which was ahead by like 45 points at the start of the campaign, ended only ahead at like 40 points in the polls. And then in the actual election, like they got 33%. It was a very weak mandate. I mean, they won an overwhelming majority of the seats, of course, but the actual percentage of the vote was pretty bad. Like, like pretty abysmal, honestly. Um, you know, yeah, the lowest of any majority party on record. Um, so their bubble kind of burst during the campaign period, but you can see how dangerous things like this are. And of course, what propped them up was just that they were running against an unpopular incumbent. Starmer, as he went forward, and now is embroiled in all of this, sticking to their budget rules and all the stuff that they did run on and they won an election on. Now that he's actually in power and having to do any of it, he's plummeting. His approvals are falling like a knife, and he's currently battling it out in this brutal three-way slog with the Reform Party and the Conservatives, right, in the UK. So, what I would suggest is that while the Liberals might feel pretty confident and comfortable right now with this whole, they're riding high on this whole, all the Trump stuff or whatever, and Carney and these other people should really seriously have some pause for what exactly is the plan going to be on these wider systemic issues like affordability once they actually get in, because unless there is some sort of ability to effect a sort of more systemic change there, which we'll see. I don't really see how what's being proposed, like a middle class tax cut, and I don't know, like some infrastructure stuff, the coast to coast pipeline, like stuff like that, which has been a project tried various times, and it's never really worked out. We'll see if this time's different, but I just it's not a situation that I envy in the long term, is how I'll put it. Carney is coming in potentially with a very, very strong start, but historically, that is something to be very cautious about, because it's really easy to assume that that level of support will hold forever, and that is not a given. And it's also not even a given it'll last over the course of this campaign. We're only at the start of this thing, and we simply don't know how things are going to go over the next month. I would suggest there's plenty of reason to believe that Liberals remain ahead, and probably by somewhat similar margins, but we don't know. They could also run a poor campaign. But at some point, the bubble's going to pop, and their supports are going to come down to what the natural level for them should be. And it's going to be very interesting to see what that level is. And I don't know. We're going to find out all in due time. So, I'm Bactrian. I was Bactrian. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, you could like and subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. I'm going to be making a lot of videos about the election and just politics in general, and also not just about Canada, perhaps about other countries. I'll mention other countries, whatever. We're talking about politics, folks. We're going to talk about all sorts of politics, all kinds of politics. Okay, so if you enjoyed that, like, subscribe, YouTube stuff. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.